Hello, and welcome back to REpensando and the series of live conversations. I'm Ana Maria Zamponia, I'm representative of the New York City Architecture Biennial in Latin America, and also co-founder of REpensando. Today, we are back here talking about rethinking souls, the success and challenge of a self-organized learning environment. It is part of our edition of Rethinking Education, specifically in early childhood. And for those of the community that are new to REpensando and haven't seen what we've been up to, you're welcome to visit us on pertanto.com. We're the educational platform for the New York City Architecture Biennial. And we're a community where we learn and discuss today's most relevant issues. Not only do we have a course in rethinking education, but we also have a design competition around the concept of play to learn. So I invite you to visit our website, pertanto.com, pertanto.com, where you can see all of the interesting things that we have going. So today, we continue to delve into the discussion of rethinking education, and we have two very influential guest speakers. Here we have Sugata Mitra and Jeff McClellan. Welcome. Give me a moment to briefly introduce you. Hello, Professor Mitra. Professor Mitra is an Indian computer scientist and educational theorist. He is best known for his hole-in-the-wall experiment and widely cited and works on literacy and education. He is Professor Emeritus at NIIT University in Rajasthan, India, a PhD in theoretical physics. He retired in 2019 as Professor of Educational Technology at Newcastle University in England. And after 13 years there, including a year in 2012 as visiting professor at MIT Media Lab in Cambridge, Massachusetts, his interests include children's education, remote presence, self-organizing systems, cognitive systems, physics, consciousness, I'm sure among others. And since 2000, Mitra has been a keynote speaker at most major educational conferences and events in the world. In 2013, Professor Mitra won the TED Prize for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Oh, of course. We are also honored to have Dr. Jeff McClellan today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's great.
Yeah, welcome.
Great.
So Jeff McClellan has a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Ohio Northern University, an MA in Educational Leadership and Administration from the University of Dayton in Ohio, and has obtained a Doctor of Education in Educational Leadership and Administration from National Louis University of Chicago, Illinois. He has a broad range of experiences as a practitioner, researcher, and entrepreneur that shaped his contributions to the field of education. He is the co-founder of Blended, did I say that correctly? Blend Ed, and the founder of Start Soul, which we'll be talking about today, an organization that helps educators and students implement student-centered, inquiry-based learning experiences using self-organized learning environments. Following this, Jeff was recruited to apply his educational entrepreneurial skills as founding head of school for MC2 STEM High School in Cleveland, Ohio, where he has served for 7 years. He is referenced in many and most important publications regarding STEM. So thank you for being here.
Thanks. It's an honor to join Sugata and you on this panel today.
I understand you both have a long history together. So you've been doing this for 20 some years.
Well, sort of, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I would love for Professor Mitra, Sugata, if you don't mind. I know a lot of people in our community, it's probably hard to believe, have never heard of your hole-in-the-wall experiment and your famous TED Talk. Maybe we could start by talking about your original vision for Soul and how it came to be.
Sure. It's actually quite a long time ago. This is an experiment from 1999. So I'm not really surprised if many of you haven't heard of it. Maybe some of you were not even born then. So what was the experiment? Well, it was very simple, actually. Back then, in 1999, computers were expensive. They were not very common at home. And in a country like India, only rich people had them. And the children of rich people used to use those computers, which their parents bought, and play with it. And I thought that this is a bit of a pity, because what about all the children who are running around, in the slums, who cannot imagine having a computer? So I did an experiment. I simply took a computer and I, put it inside a wall. You can see that in the picture on your screen. And it had no special software or anything on it. It was just a computer. And I left it there. And the children came rushing in. There was nobody to tell them anything. So people thought that this is a meaningless experiment. What's going to happen? I mean, how would they understand anything? But actually, it didn't work that way. You will understand it today very clearly. Within a few hours, the children learned how to operate the computer, how to use the mouse. And in a day or so, they began browsing and surfing. In about a week, 10 days time, they began to ask questions, to search engines. And we thought, how can they understand? It's all in English. But to my utter surprise, they somehow did understand. So that was the initial experiment. In 2006, I brought that whole experiment over to England and did the same experiment, except that I did it inside schools. So I would take children, give them 1 or 2 computers, not lots of computers, okay, just 1 or 2 computers, ask them something interesting, and something which would get their imagination working. And I would just say, well, why don't you figure it out? And again, they did. So by about 2005, it became obvious that groups of children using the internet can figure out things by themselves. Nothing new now. I mean, every parent knows that. You know that a 3-year-old can handle a tablet. But remember, back in 1999, nobody knew that. So a lot of people didn't even believe what I was saying. But anyway, we managed to show that. And then I said, well, if that's all it takes, then what about children who don't have schools? Could I not convert their curriculum into a question, into a set of questions? I mean, for example, could I ask them, why do we have 5 fingers on our hands, on each hand? Why not 4 or why not 6? And if you ask that to 9-year-olds, they'll say, oh, I don't know. And so I would say, well, I don't know either. Why don't you find out? And you would be amazed. You can try it if you want to. You would be amazed what they come up with. Stuff which is years and years ahead of their time. And people said, well, but is this learning? And I said, look, I don't know. I just know that if you take a group of children, if you give them the internet, if you ask them a difficult question, they seem to be able to answer it. Now jump forward to 2022, and we all know that. So somewhere in between, Jeff McClellan got this idea. And he did what I had not done and I could not have. He converted the whole thing into an organization, a website, an organization, all the things you need to do to spread an idea. I had succeeded in getting a few schools around the world to try this. Jeff took that to tens of thousands of schools and teachers and everything. So that was where the hole in the wall experiment, just this little experiment with 1 computer in a slum in New Delhi, went eventually. I'll stop here for the moment with that intro.
Oh, perfect. No, perfect transition. Thank you for the background. It's fascinating to see how Start Souls began. Maybe Jeff can tell us a little bit more of how a soul actually works and how to start one, and can it be applied to children in early education?
Sure. And
Thanks. Welcome.
Great introduction by Sugata. And before I jump in and just describe Start Soul, let me give you a quick backup in my history too, just to tell you how I caught on to his concept from the TED Talk. So I'm an educator by background. I was a science teacher, and then I was part of a high school transformation project where we took a big high school, broke it into 3 schools, autonomous to each other, inside of the same building. And then I was the founding head of a platform STEM high school in Cleveland, Ohio. And as the founding head of this platform STEM school, we built the kind of learning environment that we felt was necessary to prepare any student that would come to our school for the future of STEM. And a lot of it was student-centered inquiry, where the students were working in teams on big projects, oftentimes presented by the community. And then the students would earn credit for demonstrating the work that they could do through these projects. And the teachers would look at what they did and give them credit based on the standards for the subject area. So very much mastery-based learning environment. When that environment started to really take off and people started to visit, I got into the position where people were asking, how can we do this in our school? How can we do something like this? And that led to model replication work that took me to Egypt and to other places where we've been working to replicate the STEM school model. Well, that's great. And the model replication aspect works really well, but you can't model replicate for every student and every teacher and every environment in the world. And so when I saw Sugata's TED Talk and he started talking about self-organized learning environments, it just clicked with me that, wow, you know, conceptually what Sugata's presenting is pretty simple. You have a big question. Kids organize around computers, they use the internet, they learn things about the big question, they talk to each other. You know, you introduce this granny into the environment, the granny serves kind of as the coach, not unlike what we would like teachers to be able to do in a student-centered inquiry environment. And the education just takes off in ways that it never could when the teacher is controlling and directing the environment. So when I saw Sugata's talk and I understood what soul was conceptually, I started to ask the question, how can we scale soul? How can we scale this concept that Sugata has, and deliberately to teachers, you know, teachers who in some cases have been teaching the way that they're on the stage in the front and delivering instruction directly to students and they're regurgitating information. You know, if we could get every teacher to do a soul with their students, we could help them move from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, which ultimately opens up a lot of things fundamentally to, you know, to students. And so I started with the idea of scaling soul, the self-organized learning environment, to teachers in Cleveland, and that built and that grew, and now there's 36,000 plus educators on our platform from over 100 different countries, and we're impacting, you know, millions of students because their teachers or their educators are able to use a version of Sugata's initial soul concept, you know, in their more formal educational environment.
Fascinating. So these are programs that are included in curriculums in existing schools.
In existing schools, they're anything from preschool, pre-K, all the way up to graduate level courses at universities. Some people use them in adult training courses. They're used in pretty much any learning environment that there's there. Actually, in Colombia, they were using the SOUL process to facilitate some United Nations-based peace discussion. So they were using big questions there and engaging people in dialogue around these big questions, using the SOUL process to you know, bring up conversations around peace.
Fascinating. Wow, that's really interesting. Well, so I know that Sugata talks a lot about how these programs, maybe they're not measurable or standardized, or is that something that you ran into as an issue when you're implementing these programs?
Yes, very much so, right from the beginning. You know, people could see that the children were learning really interesting stuff. They could see that this was happening by itself. But they could also see that they could not control it. And they did not know what to measure. You know, I know that a lot of people listening are students of architecture, so maybe I should use an example from architecture. It's like an architect watching an apple tree grow and saying, it's got design, it's got structure, it's got strength, it's got beauty, but who is the architect? And people would ask me that. In the case of children, they would say, but who is teaching them? And they would say, is it the internet? And I said, no, it's not the internet. No one is teaching them. It's happening by itself. Now that is something that is very difficult for most teachers and for most educational organizations to accept. But you know, in nature, it's very common. Take a thunderstorm. Do you ever ask, who made it? You say, no, I mean, it just happened. You know, take a volcano and who told it to erupt? Nobody did. It just happened. So why would the human brain not behave in this self-organized, spontaneous manner? Many educational people have said this before. I'm not the first. I just happen to see children behave in this way when they have the internet. So you know, you could think of it as, why isn't it being used all the time everywhere in that case? But the reason is that very important question which you asked, Anna Maria, which is, you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, then in the world that we have created, we don't believe it. It's unfortunate. So we have to look at other ways, assess. And I'll leave it at that because I'm sure Jeff would have to, you know, have things to add to that.
Yes, please, Jeff, based on what Sugata just said, what is your response, or what has been your response to this?
I mean, you know, Sugata is just so spot on with a lot of his observations as to, you know, what the challenges are moving forward. I like to look at it from a standpoint of, you know, we're building something for the future. And right now we're using the parts that we have for the present. And so Sugata touched on the challenges of assessment. One of the reasons why it's probably, I guess I'd call it a design constraint, you know, of getting more people to use this, is that people are trying to assess kids in the way they're being told by their state or by their government or by their university. So the question is, how do we take this concept of soul and present it in a way that the people that are using it with their students can still meet the assessment requirements that they have, while we have these conversations about the assessments that they need. Because unfortunately, the educators in the middle of this, you know, I work with a lot of educators in a lot of different types of environments. Very few of them argue that this isn't a better way to teach kids. The problem is the constraints that they have in their existing environment that they're feeling, you know, overwhelmed by in a lot of cases. So how do we continue to give them tools that they can use to lead towards the 21st century, and then inspire people to have the hard discussions around assessment and the things that need to change in order to make it easier for people to implement these in their environments.
I understand. How interesting. Before I want to delve into a little bit more about the lessons you've learned from the implementation of these souls all over the world, and maybe who's been able to enhance on it or do it best, I want to remind the audience, if they have any questions, to please put them into the Q&A chat so we can get to them later. But Jeff, do you mind talking a little bit about the challenges and lessons that you faced in the implementation of souls, and how you've tackled them and how you've been able to grow and continue to grow?
Sure. I mean, I think we started alluding to some of the challenges when we were talking about, you know, assessments and the constraints that educators have. But essentially, you know, you have teachers who, a lot of them have been doing the same thing the same way for a long time. And now we're presenting to them another option that looks very different than what they're used to doing. And so if one of the things that, you know, we saw as a constraint early on was the teacher who said, well, I have to teach this standard, or I have to teach that standard. And so one of the ways we tried to help people overcome that was by creating it's kind of a self-organizing database of questions. Teachers use questions for souls. They put them in the system. Now they're available to other teachers that want to use them, but it's aligned to the standards that they have to cover. So if I'm a third grade math teacher in Pennsylvania, I get on the platform, I can see third grade soul questions that are aligned to my math standards in Pennsylvania. And if I get on in Ohio, I can see things aligned to the Ohio standards. So we try to create tools that teachers could use to identify the things that they needed to be addressing, and give them the lesson plans and the directions to how to do a soul in their environment. So, you know, it's a little bit of a, Sugata and I have talked, sometimes the questions get a little smaller. They're not as like great as like, you know, how does this tree grow, or where did this thunderstorm come from? But they still give kids the opportunity to leverage the internet and their research skills to answer open-ended questions. And it gives the teacher a way to experience it from the facilitator's standpoint, so that they can practice being the guide on the side. Because I know it sounds really easy to just say, just stand back in awe and watch as students like do self-organized learning. But the reality is, if you're a teacher, sometimes it's very hard to give up that control. And so that's one thing that we've done is build the tools and the platform, and the website's free for any educator anywhere. So they can just log on to Start Soul, get an account, access the database of questions, and use the tools that are there.
Amazing. Sounds like a balance between freedom and form, right? Constantly going back and forth.
Right.
Well, I would love to know from Professor Mitra if he's working on anything else for the evolution of this concept. Do you want to share some, what are you working on now? What keeps you up at night?
Well, nothing much keeps me up at night. I'm a pretty good sleeper. But yes, I am concerned with this whole issue of assessment. And I have a couple of very simple questions, you know, for you, for everybody really. You know, suppose you have two guys and they're trying to go from, let's say, the Grand Central Station in New York to Times Square. And they're new, they don't know the city very well. One guy uses Google Map and walks and gets there. The other guy actually knows the way in his head, and he also gets there. Would we say that one is better than the other? I guess not. We would say, well, both of them got to where they had to go. But if it is an examination in a school, then the guy who pulls out stuff from his head is considered better than the guy who looks it up. In fact, it's even worse than that. In life, looking up things on the internet is something that all of us do all the time. But looking up things on the internet during an exam is called cheating. So if looking up things on the internet is cheating, then are we all cheating all the time? Every time you use Google, are you cheating? Of course not. So I have a very simple idea, a very simple suggestion. What would happen if we let children or let students use the internet, use their smartphones during the exam? And I know that there are students listening to this. What do you think will happen? Well, some people will say, oh, everybody will score very high scores. As though scoring high, getting a high score is something bad, that it shouldn't happen. So what if everybody gets a high score? The second thing is, I've tried this experiment, and guess what? Everybody doesn't get a high score. Some people do well, some people do badly, just as they do in real life. So if we let the internet into the exam room, then the entire teaching system has to change. Because then teachers will have to tell their students, okay, learn how to search properly. Because in the exam, you'll have to search quickly and accurately, which is what children should be learning. So I'm doing a set of experiments with some of my colleagues to try and measure what would happen if we allowed internet access during exams. What sort of questions should we ask? the progress is slow because in education, it takes years and years and years for a change to happen. But I'm confident that the young people who are listening to this, to whom it makes sense, they will make the change.
Right. Have you seen this happen, Jeff, at all? In any of the SOUL programs have some professors or practitioners taken this to a new level?
Yes, I actually have. Jeff, just a quick interjection there. I was very recently in Jerusalem in Israel for the OECD Education Conference. And guess what? The Israeli government is actually doing this. They heard what I was saying, and they've started introducing the internet into exams, and they have something interesting to say. The scores changed, but they changed only by 10%. It's nothing. It doesn't matter. Okay. So the answer to your question before I hand over to Jeff is that yes, one whole nation is trying it.
A whole nation. Wow. And on this side of the world, in the Americas, Jeff, have you seen that as well?
Not as simple as just saying use the internet during the examinations, but there's a lot of examples where there's authentic assessment going on where students are being given broad questions and given time to work on these broad questions and have some type of an authentic exhibition of their work. MC Squared was set up that way, and the schools that I work with in Egypt, they actually designed their curriculum around the grand challenges of the country. And then the students work in groups for 10 to 15 week periods to come up with solutions to these specific questions associated with the grand challenges of the country. And then those scores actually count for part of their admission to the university in the public system in Egypt. They replaced the end of course test, which is your typical multiple choice test. So not as simple and pragmatic a response to Sugata to the way that they're handling it in Israel, but definitely see examples around the world where students are giving more authentic assessments and being asked to respond in more, more of a soul-like manner.
Amazing. Do you think that the evolution of souls will continue, Jeff, in this side of the world? And have you had, maybe you want to share a failure or interesting story of one specific case?
Yeah, I definitely think the evolution is continuing. And, you talk about failures, like I start every conversation if I'm working with a new group of educators is the first time you do this, it's not going to go well. It's not like if you're used to teaching one way, like you need to do something differently, it's not going to go well the first time because the students are conditioned to respond a certain way, the teacher's conditioned to direct a certain way. And so to me, failure is stopping after the first time, in learning is like watching what happens the first time and then modifying the process accordingly in the second. And typically when we've worked with people in more formal educational environments in the US, it seems to take like 3 times. The first one is kind of rough. The second one is a little bit better. And by the third time, the kids are loving the freedom and the ability to share. They've gotten over some of their initial things that have been holding them back. And the teacher is seeing the benefit of it and they're continuing. And so then the evolution is like, now that the students are doing this and the teachers are doing it, what else can they do that's more complex and more, takes over more of the learning environment in a longer period of time? And that's where the Start Soul team is really focusing on creating simple add-ons for these classrooms that are already in the soul process. And one of the things that we're really interested in right now is the assessment element. If we can help teachers with the assessment piece of the soul process, then hopefully we can get them to be more open to these, using the internet on their exams type thing in all different ways of their teaching.
Fascinating. Thank you. Well, I want to quickly open up to questions and answers, but before that, I want to know both of your perspectives on the future of learning. How do you see it? What's your vision? Are parents at home going to start souls to supplement their children's education when they don't have access to it? How do you see the future of learning? Sugata, please.
Well, it really depends on many things. If you say, what will be the future of learning next year at this time? I'm afraid my answer is it will be exactly what it is this year at this time. If you say, what will it be 10 years from now? I think that the exam system would have changed a bit. I don't know how much. And if you say, well, what about 100 years from now? What will it be like? I want to leave one idea for your viewers to look at. In all of our assessment, in most of our teaching, we ask questions to which we know the answer. Somebody knows the answer. And that's how you correct. And you say, okay, this is the right answer. I think the big change in education, in learning in the future would be a shift into a learning situation where the questions that you ask are such that their answers are not known. Imagine an exam where you're asked a question to which no one knows the answer. That's when the fun will begin, but I'll leave it at that at the moment.
Exactly. Like the path
I mean,
to peace, right?
Sugata is such a much bigger thinker than I am, so I'm going to leave a lot of the futurist piece to him. I have a simple analogy that I think applies here. When people first started building automobiles, some people were resisting, saying, well, I'll just go out and buy a faster horse. And I think that's we're at a tipping point in education right now where the system itself isn't going to be able to sustain its incremental, I'm going to say growth, but it's incremental change because what the internet is doing and social media and technology is doing is so disruptive that I can't even imagine what the future of learning will look like in 100 years, because the rapid increase in access to technology, the rapid increase in available information, it's exponential. And so I don't think we're looking at a faster horse. I don't think the educational system we have is even going to look like a version of the educational system that will be in place 100 years from now. I can't even get my mind around what it might be, because I just think the technological advances and the way social media and these things are really taking on. And then, I mean, you have probably a VR headset on that student now. The augmented realities and the metaverse and those things are just going to impact education, I think, in ways that we can't just keep doing things the way that we were at some point. So I don't really have an answer to that question.
Okay, great. Well, I know you've developed a lot of software technology for many different programs, right? And so that has a huge impact. So I have some questions from the audience, if we can go open up to that. Let's begin with Sheena. She's asking, for SOLs, are there any specific recommendations based on design of the classroom and educational spaces?
Well, I've had several occasions to look at SOLs. I've seen them inside schools built in England, in New York, in Harlem. You had a picture of that a few slides back. In China and in Australia. One thing that's interesting is that all of them decided on a similar design. The design basically has a lot of open space. It does not have rows and columns, and it has a few computers, usually on some kind of a stand around which children can gather. Usually children would gather in a kind of a semicircle, so that all of them can see the screen, 3 or 4 or 5 of them. So if you can imagine a room like that, then that seems to be the universal design for the kind of space that you need to do a SOL.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, Sugata covered that pretty well, I think.
Okay. So we have another question from Kati Borges. Is there a age range where independent learning can work and other age ranges where it does not work. For example, for little kids who don't know how to write or read at first, or for college students who are learning a technical skill?
Jeff, I need to jump in here again. I must. I'm sorry. All right, because I was recently in the United States, and something I believed in got destroyed there. I have to tell you this. You see, I used to believe, like the person asking the question, that you need to be able to read and write before you can actually do a soul, obviously. So that gives us an age, around 6, 7, 8 years is the point at which it starts. Is there an upper limit? No, it can go on forever. It doesn't matter. I've tried it with, I've tried it with young people. I've tried it with older people. I've tried it with, retired people. It works everywhere. But at the other end, does it begin when you learn how to read? Well, this time in the United States, I got a call from a teacher somewhere in New Mexico. And she said, I really love souls. And we talked for a little while. And I said, well, and who do you do the souls with? And she said, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. And I said, what? What kind of soul do you do with? Do you ask them a question? She said, no, they are, well, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I said, but how do they look at things on the internet? And she said, they don't look, they talk. I thought, oh, I missed that. In all these years, computers now have learned how to listen and how to talk. So the children ask questions using voice. And Google and Alexa and whoever comes back in voice. Are they really good? I don't know. Is it safe? I don't know. We have to think about it. But the answer to your question, how young can we go? As young as you like, seems to be the answer.
Yeah, it's just natural. It's almost like it's a version of play, and kids play when they're little. I think we try to take that away in school, but no, I mean, and the question says independent learning. I would say that what we're answering isn't necessarily independent learning. It's collaborative learning. So if the question was really about can they learn through soul, then the answer is absolutely, any age.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. I have a question separate. Is the Start Soul program something that parents can log into and start their own souls at home with home learning systems? Is this something that it's meant for, or it's meant more for structured programs?
It can be used by anyone. The platform itself will give you a whole bank of relevant questions that you can choose by grade level or age level. You can look at subject areas. It'll give you a little like mini lesson plan if you want to figure out how to structure the time, which in some cases at home you don't really have to structure the time that much at all. It gives you resources that students can use to kind of organize their ideas. Yeah, it can be used. And we do have people who are using it at home. It also has a free web-based platform. It uses Big Blue Button. It's kind of like Zoom, but it has the ability to put people into breakout rooms and to work on a whiteboard, and that's free as well. So people can, if they need to do it virtually, they can get on and use the virtual tool that's there.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that part. Interesting. So I have another question, and we're actually open up the camera for this one. Let's see if I can do that. Hello, welcome.
Nice meeting you. So it was really great listening to everything you had to provide on this webinar. It was really interesting, and I was thinking, would you say that the proposal is to change altogether on the current way we practice education to set it to the soul system? Like how should a day in the life of a student should look like? How should it be? For example, if we know that most of the educational systems, mainly in Latin America, are outdated. So what would it be outdated in that education new system?
Well, as Jeff said, it's really hard to predict what might happen. But there are some general things that we can say.
Mhm.
You know, what is really different about our children, the children who are growing up now, and when the previous generation grew up? The big difference, as you would guess, is the internet. What's so different about it? Well, every book, every teacher, every piece of information, every video, everything is available all the time in your pocket. So, what should I keep inside my brain? In the previous generation, it was very simple. Books are not available everywhere. Your teachers are not available everywhere. So here are all the things you must memorize and keep inside your head, because when you need it, you'll have to pull it out of your head. The generation growing up today will say, but why don't you just give me my phone back? I'll figure it out. That's the big, big difference, okay? Just keep those words in mind. The next education system's motto will be, figure it out, as opposed to tell me the answer. I think that's about as general as I can get. What will they translate to in school? Really don't know. What will assessment look like? Well, you know, if you're hiring an assistant for a shop, do you want to know, would you hire the guy who remembers every item in the shop's shelves? Or would you hire the guy who can Google it and tell you? You decide. So if it's the latter, then we need a different kind of assessment. We need to know, can you handle the internet? Can you live with the internet? Okay. And when you let your child grow, I think, and this is an opinion, not a scientific fact, I think you must remember that a child grows like a tree. You can't build a child like a building. We tried doing that for 200 or 300 years in the industrial age. Build people like buildings, plan it. Doesn't work. People grow like trees. That's what the new system is going to be like.
Love
Thank
that.
you so much.
Jeff, did you want to add to that? Our soul's going to replace everything that we know about the current curriculum?
The whole notion of organizing around questions and using the internet, it just opens up to so many things that we need future ready humans to do. It's collaboration, it's critical thinking, it's the use of creativity, and it's increased communication skills. You know, those things are they need to be the future of the school day, to be the future of the school year, because those jobs that you know, that the Industrial Revolution created no longer exist. And so that's what we need. So, I mean, what the year and the day looks like, it's, you know, it's going to be a lot more of things like soul that allow that to be facilitated. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to follow Sugata with an answer like he's such a futurist when it comes to these things.
It's amazing. I love the philosopher in you.
My hero is Socrates, you know, and everything we talked about this afternoon here relates back to this man who lived 2,500 years ago. And what was his message? Don't teach, ask questions.
It's so true. Well, I think our last question should then be, what makes a good question? And I'll ask both of you.
Oh, that's, well, I mean, you have Jeff's approach, which is fantastic, which is a database. Okay, but there are pros and cons. See, if I was a teacher and I know that there's this fantastic database available, then I would turn to the database. I wouldn't try to think of a question. That's the danger. The good news is that if you are the kind of teacher who says, well, I don't have the time to think of a question, but you have the question banked, so you can't have an excuse to say, I don't know what to ask. But as far as how do you make a question, I wish there was a formula. There isn't. the closest I can come to is to say, for those of you who have children, think like a 9-year-old, and the questions will come.
Okay, I'll do just that. I have a 6 and 11-year-old, so I can
There
easily
you go.
relate.
You know what I mean.
Exactly. Jeff, did you want to respond to that?
No, I think Sugata covered it.
Great. Well, it's been so wonderful to talk to you both today. I really appreciate all of your inputs and your contributions to the edition by being here on this live and by creating the coursework. Sugata, we've had so much good feedback, and the edition continues by offering, as I was saying before, a competition of ideas that we'll keep you both in the loop on creating games and programs around the concept of play to learn, which you both mentioned before. And so we'll let you know if you want to participate as jurors on the competition, which will come about around end of September. And the next live coming up is we're going to be talking about neuroscience application to learning. That's August 10th. So those of you who are interested in that, you can sign up on repensanto.com and on the NYCAB platform. So today's live will be recorded and can be watched at any time on Facebook, YouTube, and repensanto.com. So thank you all for being with us. Thank you so much, Jeff and Sugata, for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks.
Really honored. Thank you.
Thanks.
See you
Bye.
soon.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.